His lawyer leaned in and whispered 3 words, just 3, and Mitchell Crane's face turned the color of old bone. The conference room in downtown Atlanta was all polished wood and leather chairs, the kind of room where deals got made and lives got dismantled. Mitchell sat at the head of the table, pen in hand, the divorce papers spread before him like a feast. He'd fought for everything: the house in Buckhead, the portfolio of commercial properties, the shares in Crane Development Group, the cars, the accounts, everything. And he'd won. Layla sat across from him, 35 years old, 12 years of marriage ending with her signature on page after page. She wore a simple gray dress, no jewelry except her grandmother's silver brooch pinned near her collar. Her hands rested in her lap, still, quiet. Mitchell signed the last page with a flourish, the same pen he'd used to close his first major deal. He pushed the documents toward the mediator with the confidence of a man who believed he'd outmaneuvered everyone in the room. That's when his lawyer, Caroline Meacham, leaned close. 3 words. Mitchell's smile froze. He asked to see a specific document. His eyes moved across the numbers, once, twice. His hand began to tremble. Layla watched him, the way you watch a storm you've been expecting for years. She'd rehearsed this moment so many times in her mind that living it felt almost like remembering. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what Mitchell Crane had just signed and what it would cost him, you need to go back to a time when Layla still believed that love and loyalty meant the same thing. Layla Crane, 35 years old, 12 years married to a man who just fought for everything she owned and won. At least that's what he thought. Layla grew up in Savannah, in a house that smelled like magnolias and old books. Her parents were the kind of people who loved the idea of family more than the work of it. Her father spent his days chasing promotions. Her mother spent hers chasing the approval of women that didn't matter. They provided everything a child could need, except presence. The one who actually raised her was Ruth Eleanor Simmons, Layla's maternal grandmother, a widow since 44 who turned a small fabric shop into 3 profitable stores before she turned 60. She had hands that knew work and eyes that knew people, and she had a way of saying things that stayed with you long after she'd said them. One evening, when Layla was 16, Ruth sat her down at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, tax returns, contracts, bank statements. She said, "Men will promise you the moon, baby, but the moon don't pay the mortgage. Always know where the money is. Always have a door that's yours to open." Layla didn't fully understand then, but she remembered. Ruth taught her to read balance sheets the way other grandmothers taught recipes, to notice what people didn't say, to trust patterns more than promises. By the time Layla graduated from college with a degree in finance, she had something more valuable than any diploma, an instinct for seeing what others tried to hide. She met Mitchell Crane in Atlanta in the spring of 2012. She was 23, working as a junior analyst at a mid-sized accounting firm. He was 25, a real estate agent with more ambition than inventory, and a smile that made you believe he knew something no one else did. Their third date, he took her to see a crumbling warehouse in Old Fourth Ward. Most people would have seen rot and rust. Mitchell saw potential. He walked her through the space, pointing at walls that didn't exist yet, describing the lofts, the retail, the community that would grow there. His eyes were bright, his voice was certain, and for the first time in her careful, calculated life, Layla let herself believe in someone else's vision. They married in the summer of 2012, a small ceremony. Ruth was there, watching Mitchell with the quiet attention of someone taking measurements. After the reception, Ruth pulled Layla aside. She said, "He's charming, and he believes in himself. That can be a gift or a curse. Just make sure you always know which one it is." Layla smiled and said she would. She didn't know how much those words would cost to understand.
The first few years were good, hard but good. Layla left her job to help Mitchell build the business. In practice, that meant she did the books, negotiated with lenders, structured the contracts, and kept the lights on while he shook hands and closed deals. He was the face, she was the spine. Their son, Garrett, was born in 2014. Mitchell was in the middle of 3 simultaneous closings. He arrived at the hospital 6 hours after the delivery, carrying flowers and wearing the expression of a man who expected to be forgiven simply because he'd shown up. The flowers were beautiful, the apology was smooth, and Layla filed both in a drawer in her mind she didn't know she was building. By 2018, Crane Development Group was a name people recognized. Mitchell had his photo in Atlanta magazine. He joined the right clubs, played golf with the right people. And somewhere along the way, he started believing the story he told at dinner parties, the one where he'd built everything himself. Layla noticed. She always noticed. She also noticed something else. Around 2020, Mitchell started signing documents without reading them, taking loans to cover other loans, calling it creative leverage. The properties looked impressive on paper, but paper could hide a lot. She didn't confront him, didn't ask questions. She just started paying closer attention. And she called Ruth. Her grandmother listened to everything, the numbers, the patterns, the feeling Layla couldn't shake. Then Ruth said, "A house built on sand looks just like a house built on rock until the storm comes." Layla asked what she should do. Ruth was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You don't tear down someone else's house, baby. You just make sure you're not standing inside when it falls." That decision would cost him everything. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now let's continue. The first time Layla felt truly invisible was at a company dinner in the fall of 2021.
Mitchell had just closed a deal on a mixed-use development in Midtown, his biggest yet. The investors were there, the lawyers, the architects, everyone who mattered, according to Mitchell. Layla sat beside him, wearing a dress he'd picked out, smiling at jokes she'd heard before. At some point, one of the investors, a man named Preston with silver hair and a heavy watch, raised his glass. He said, "Mitchell, I gotta ask, how'd you build all this? What's your secret?" Mitchell laughed, the kind of laugh that filled a room. He said, "Honestly, no secret, just long nights, a lot of coffee, and a wife who knows when to stay out of the way." The table laughed. Layla laughed too. Her jaw ached from the effort. Preston turned to her then, with the patronizing smile that successful men reserve for wives they don't need to impress. He said, "You must be very proud. Supporting a man like Mitchell isn't easy, I'm sure." Before Layla could respond, Mitchell jumped in. He said, "Layla's been great, really great. She handles the home front so I can focus on the big picture." The home front, like she was managing a household instead of having built the financial infrastructure that made every one of his deals possible. Layla smiled and said, "Happy to help." Preston nodded, already losing interest, and turned back to Mitchell to discuss some golf tournament neither of them had actually played in. What none of them knew, what Mitchell himself had forgotten, was that Layla had set up every single account he was bragging about. She'd structured the first loan, she'd caught the errors that would have cost them the Midtown deal, and she still had the passwords. She didn't say any of that. She just sipped her wine and memorized every face at the table. Later that night, alone in the bathroom of the restaurant, she looked at herself in the mirror. Same face she'd had at 23 when Mitchell first told her she was brilliant. Same eyes, same hands that had built the foundation he was now claiming as his own. She didn't cry. Crying wouldn't change anything. Instead, she straightened her dress, fixed her lipstick, and walked back to the table with a smile no one would question. The drive home was silent. Mitchell was on his phone, texting someone, laughing at messages he didn't share. Layla watched the city lights pass by her window and thought about Ruth's words. A house built on sand looks just like a house built on rock until the storm comes. She was starting to see the sand, but she had no idea what was waiting for her. The second shift came quietly. In early 2022, Mitchell restructured the company. New branding, new office, new leadership. He brought in a CFO, Denise Pruitt, 32, MBA from Emory, sharp and hungry. Mitchell called it professionalizing the operation. What it meant in practice was that Layla's name disappeared from the paperwork. Her access was quietly revoked. Her role shifted from partner to +1. The day it happened, Layla tried to log into the company accounts, the same accounts she'd created years ago. Access denied. She called Mitchell. He didn't answer. She called again. Nothing. That evening, he came home late, loosening his tie with the casual exhaustion of a man who expected dinner to be waiting. She asked him about the access. He sighed, like she was a child asking a complicated question. He said, "Babe, it's just a system update. Denise is handling all the financial stuff now. You don't need to worry about it." Layla said she wasn't worried. She said she just wanted to understand. Mitchell kissed her forehead, the kind of kiss you give to end a conversation. He said, "You've done so much. You deserve a break. Focus on Garrett. Enjoy life a little. Let me handle the business." She didn't argue. She just started keeping copies. Every document she could access, every statement that came to the house, every piece of paper that Mitchell left on his desk when he thought she wasn't paying attention. She photographed them, stored them, built an archive that no one knew existed. What happened next would change everything. The third shift came in March 2022. A receipt, the Ritz-Carlton, a suite, champagne for two.
Layla found it in a pocket of a jacket she was taking to the cleaners. Such a small thing, such a common story. The kind of discovery that happens every day to women who thought they were loved. The woman's name was Brianne Holloway, 26, a real estate agent at Crane Development, blonde, ambitious, the kind of woman who laughed at everything Mitchell said and never asked about the numbers. Layla did her research, quietly, thoroughly, the way Ruth had taught her. Brianne had joined the company 8 months earlier. Her sales numbers were mediocre. Her Instagram was full of luxury, designer bags, expensive dinners, weekend trips that didn't match her salary. And in almost every photo from the past 3 months, there was a detail that didn't belong. A man's watch on the nightstand, a jacket draped over a chair, Mitchell's jacket. Layla didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't confront. She photographed the receipt, added it to the folder she'd been building, and she called Ruth. Ruth listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't gasp or express shock. She lived long enough to know that this story was as old as marriage itself. When Layla finished, Ruth asked, "What do you want to do?" Layla said, "I want to be ready." Ruth said, "Then be ready, but don't move until the ground is solid under your feet. Let him think he's winning. Men like him can't help but overreach. It's in their nature." She didn't know it yet, but someone was watching. A week later, Mitchell mentioned at dinner that Brianne had real potential, that she deserved a bigger role. He said it casually, the way you mentioned the weather, like Layla wouldn't notice, like she couldn't see the truth sitting right in front of her. Layla smiled and said she was sure Brianne would go far. Mitchell heard agreement. He didn't hear the door closing behind him. The months that followed were an education in invisibility. Mitchell stopped coming home for dinner. Business meetings, he said, client dinners, networking events. The excuses were so thin they were almost insulting, like he didn't think she was worth a convincing lie. His phone was always face down on the table. His schedule was always full, and Brianne's name appeared more and more often in company emails and social posts in the background of photos from events Layla wasn't invited to. The cruelest part wasn't the affair. It was the way Mitchell looked at her now, like she was furniture, like she'd already been replaced in his mind and was just slow to catch up with reality. She watched him rehearse his new life while still living in the old one, watched him practice being someone else's partner, watched him erase 12 years of shared history with every dismissive glance. But she kept watching. That was the important part. The worst part? This was only the beginning. In January 2023, Mitchell's mother came to visit. Darlene Crane, 63, a widow who'd reinvented herself when Mitchell started succeeding. She wore her son's success like a coat she'd earned herself, and she'd never liked Layla. Too quiet, too plain, not the kind of woman who could keep up with a man like Mitchell. The first morning of Darlene's visit, Layla came downstairs to find her mother-in-law already in the kitchen, reorganizing the cabinets. Darlene looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that was all teeth and no warmth. She said, "Good morning, dear. I hope you don't mind. I just think things flow better when they're properly organized." Layla said she didn't mind. Darlene spent the week rearranging the kitchen, the living room, the master bedroom closet, always with helpful suggestions, always with that smile. She said things like, "Have you thought about updating the drapes? They're looking a bit tired." And, "Mitchell works so hard, you really should learn to cook more than 3 dishes." And, "It must be nice having so much free time now that you're not working." Each comment was a small cut, designed to bleed slowly, designed to be deniable. And then Brianne came to dinner. Mitchell introduced her as a colleague, an up-and-comer, someone the family should know.
Darlene lit up like she'd been waiting for this moment. She asked Brienne questions about her career, her plans, her family. She laughed at Brienne's jokes, complimented her dress, touched her arm with the easy affection she'd never shown Layla. At one point, Darlene asked Brienne about her background, where she'd grown up, where she'd gone to school. Brienne said she was from Marietta, had gone to Georgia State, was the first in her family to finish college. Darlene nodded approvingly. She said, "Self-made, I love that. Too many young women these days expect everything handed to them." Layla felt the words land like a slap. She'd worked her way through college, had earned her degree in finance, had built the business alongside Mitchell, while Darlene was still telling everyone her son was destined for great things. But she said nothing, just cut her steak and kept her face neutral. Later, Brienne excused herself to use the bathroom. Darlene leaned toward Mitchell and said, in a voice just loud enough for Layla to hear, "Now that's the kind of woman who matches your potential." Mitchell didn't disagree, he just smiled. Layla sat at her own dinner table, in her own home, and felt herself disappear. After dinner, while Mitchell walked Brienne to her car, Darlene cornered Layla in the kitchen. She said, "You know, dear, I've always thought you were a bit too passive for Mitchell. He needs someone who can keep up with him, someone with ambition." Layla dried a dish, placed it carefully in the cabinet. She said, "I'm sure you're right, Darlene." Darlene smiled, the smile of someone who thought she'd won something. She said, "I'm glad we can be honest with each other. It's so important to see things clearly, don't you think?" Layla looked at her mother-in-law, really looked at her. 63 years of carefully constructed superiority, a lifetime of attaching herself to other people's success and calling it her own. She said, "I think seeing clearly is a gift. Not everyone has it." Darlene missed the meaning entirely. She patted Layla's arm and went to find Mitchell. That night, Layla called Ruth. She said, "His mother brought the other woman to dinner in our house." Ruth was silent for a moment. Then she said, "They're getting comfortable. That's good."
Layla said, "How was that good?" Ruth said, "Comfortable people make mistakes. They stop looking over their shoulders. They assume they've already won." Layla thought about that, about Darlene's smug smile, about Mitchell's casual cruelty, about the way they all assumed she was too beaten down to notice what was happening right in front of her. Ruth said, "Let them get comfortable, baby. The more comfortable they are, the harder they'll fall." He thought he'd won. He was wrong. 3 weeks later, Brienne was pregnant. Mitchell delivered the news like he was announcing a business opportunity. He said he and Layla needed to talk about the future, about being mature, about accepting that things had changed. He didn't apologize. He didn't even try. He just explained, calmly and rationally, that Brienne was having his child, and that meant certain adjustments would need to be made. Layla listened. She let him finish. Then she asked a single question. She said, "What do you want?" Mitchell blinked. He had expected tears, accusations, the things wives were supposed to do when their husbands announced they'd impregnated someone else. He said, "I want the house, the properties, the company. I want a clean break. You can have alimony, something fair." Layla nodded. She said she'd think about it. That night she called Ruth, told her everything. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He wants everything? Let him have it." Layla said, "Grandma, you don't understand. He's—" Ruth cut her off. She said, "I understand perfectly. He's handing you the sword and asking you to hold it while he falls on it. All you have to do is stand still." 2 weeks later, Layla had the papers drawn up. She gave Mitchell exactly what he asked for. The official end came in February 2023. Mitchell filed for divorce. His lawyers sent a proposal that read like a looting. Everything to him, scraps to her. He expected negotiation, counteroffers, the usual dance. Instead, he got compliance.
Layla signed every page without argument, without hesitation, without asking for a single thing beyond what was offered. His lawyers were suspicious. They told Mitchell it was too easy, that she must be planning something. Mitchell laughed it off. He said she's not planning anything. She never was. That's her problem. She doesn't know how to fight. He believed it because he needed to believe it, because admitting the alternative would mean admitting that he'd underestimated her for 12 years. Darlene organized a baby shower for Brienne in April. She held it at the Buckhead house, the house that was still technically half Layla's until the divorce was finalized. Layla wasn't invited, but she heard about everything. The decorations, the champagne, the guests cooing over the nursery that Darlene had designed herself, the way Brienne sat in the living room like she'd always belonged there. Most painful of all, Darlene had cleared out the guest room that used to hold Lila's things, her books, her grandmother's quilts, the box of mementos from her own childhood, all of it thrown into cardboard boxes and stacked in the garage like trash waiting for pickup. Garrett came home from a weekend with his father and told her about it. His voice was small, confused. He said, "Mom, your stuff is all in boxes. Brian said they needed the space." Lila held him and said it was okay. She said things were just changing, and change was hard, but they would be fine. But inside, something crystallized, cold and patient and absolutely certain. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the way they all assumed she was broken. Mitchell, Darlene, Brian, even some of her friends. They looked at her with pity, spoke to her slowly, offered help she didn't need. They thought the story was over, that she was the sad ending. They had no idea the story hadn't even started. There was one more humiliation, the final one, the one that sealed everything. In late February, a week before the divorce was finalized, Mitchell hosted a company event at the Buckhead House, a celebration, he called it, a new chapter for Crane development.
Layla wasn't invited, of course, but Garrett was. Mitchell had insisted. He'd said it was important for their son to see that everything was okay, that the family was evolving, not ending. Garrett didn't want to go. He said as much, standing in Layla's kitchen with his shoes untied and his eyes wet. He said, "Do I have to?" Layla knelt down, tied his shoes, looked him in the eyes. She said, "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but sometimes we do hard things because they show us who people really are. You'll understand when you're older." Garrett went. He came back 3 hours later in his father's car. Mitchell didn't walk him to the door, just waited in the driveway until Garrett was inside, then drove away. Garrett didn't say anything at first. He just went to his room and closed the door. Layla gave him space, made dinner, set his plate at the table, waited. Eventually, he came out, sat down, pushed the food around his plate. She didn't press, she just sat with him. Finally, he said, "Mom, why does Grandma Darlene pretend I'm not there?" Layla's heart cracked, just a little, just enough. She said, "What do you mean, baby?" Garrett said, "She was showing everyone the baby's room, Brianne's baby, and she kept saying how excited she was to be a grandmother, like she forgot I exist." Layla reached across the table and took his hand. She said, "Some people get confused about what family means. They think it's about who's new and exciting, but real family is about who stays, who shows up, who loves you even when it's hard." Garrett looked at her, 10 years old, trying so hard to understand a world that had stopped making sense. He said, "You stayed." Layla squeezed his hand. She said, "I'll always stay." That night, after Garrett was asleep, Layla sat in the dark and let herself feel it, all of it, the anger she'd been containing, the grief she'd been postponing, the exhaustion of holding herself together while everyone around her tried to tear her apart. She didn't cry. Crying still felt like giving them something, but she sat with the weight of it, acknowledged it, let it settle into her bones. Then she picked up her phone and called Ruth. Ruth answered like she'd been waiting. She said, "Tell me." Layla told her everything, the party, Darlene, what Garrett had said. When she finished, Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "There's a special place in hell for women who hurt children to get at their mothers." Layla almost laughed. Almost. Ruth said, "But that's not your concern right now. Your concern is that boy and yourself, and making sure that when this is over, you both come out whole." Layla said, "I know." Ruth said, "1 more week. Can you hold on for 1 more week?" Layla said she could. Ruth said, "Good, because after next week, everything changes, and you need to be ready." Layla was ready. She'd been ready for 3 years. What she didn't tell Ruth, what she didn't tell anyone, was that she'd already moved the last pieces into place. The documents were filed, the disclosures were complete. Every debt, every lien, every obligation was properly recorded and waiting to be discovered. Mitchell thought he was about to win the biggest negotiation of his life. He had no idea he'd already lost. By May 2023, Layla had moved into a small apartment in Decatur. 2 bedrooms, clean lines, no view, the kind of place that asked nothing of you.
Mitchell interpreted the move as surrender. He told friends she'd finally accepted reality. He told his mother that Layla had always been practical. She knew when she was beaten. Darlene visited the Buckhead house almost daily now. She and Brienne were redecorating with the enthusiasm of conquerors. New furniture, new art, new everything. Mitchell wrote the checks without looking at the amounts. The nursery was finished in June. Soft yellows and creams. A crib that cost more than Layla's monthly rent. Darlene posted photos online with captions about family and fresh starts and blessings.
Layla saw the posts. She didn't react, she didn't block anyone. She just kept scrolling. Her friend Margot came over one evening with wine and concern. Margot had known Layla since college. She'd watched the marriage from the outside, always slightly worried, never saying anything. Now she said, "Layla, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Layla poured the wine and waited. Margot said, "Are you okay? Really okay? Because you're so calm, it's starting to scare me." Layla took a sip, thought about the question, thought about all the things she couldn't explain. She said, "I'm exactly where I need to be." Margot didn't understand. She frowned. She said, "That's not an answer. You lost everything. Your house, your husband, your whole life. How can you sit there like nothing happened?" Layla set down her glass. She looked at her friend, her kind, worried friend who saw only the surface. She said, "I didn't lose everything, Margot. I lost things I never really had." Margot opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Something in Layla's voice stopped her, something certain and calm and slightly terrifying. That night, after Margot left, Layla sat on her small balcony with the wine glass empty beside her. The city hummed in the distance. Somewhere, Mitchell was celebrating his new life. Somewhere, Darlene was planning a future that didn't include her. Somewhere, Brienne was picking out baby names. And Layla sat in the dark thinking about numbers. Because here's what nobody knew. Here's what Mitchell had never bothered to learn. The empire he was fighting so hard to keep was hollow. She'd found the first crack back in 2020, buried in a statement that shouldn't have been in the Home Office, a loan document, high interest, short term, used to cover a shortfall on a property that should have been cash flowing. She dug deeper, carefully, quietly, found liens she hadn't known about, credit lines maxed out and hidden behind holding companies, properties mortgaged and remortgaged until the equity was smoke.
Mitchell's creative leverage was just another name for a house of cards. She'd told Ruth, showed her the numbers, page by page, like a diagnosis. Ruth had studied them with the same careful attention she'd once given her own business. Then she'd looked up and said, "So the golden boy is juggling knives. Question is, do you hand him another one, or do you step out of the way?" Layla had chosen to step out of the way. For 3 years, she'd quietly separated everything that was legally hers. The inheritance from Ruth, modest but real, had never been commingled with Mitchell's accounts. A few investments she'd made in her own name, early in the marriage, before Mitchell started treating her money as his money. A small trust she'd established for Garrett, funded slowly, documented carefully, structured so that Mitchell couldn't touch it even if he tried. Mitchell never noticed. He was too busy being important. And now, as he fought for everything in the divorce, he was fighting for exactly what Layla wanted him to have. The assets, the properties, the company, and every single debt attached to them. Mitchell thought he was winning. He thought the story was over. He was wrong. The night before the final divorce hearing, Layla visited Ruth. Her grandmother lived in the same house in Savannah where Layla had learned to read contracts. The porch still creaked in the same places. The kitchen still smelled like strong coffee and determination. Ruth was 78 now, slower but no less sharp. She sat across from Layla at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd spread out those papers all those years ago. She said, "Tomorrow's the day." Layla nodded. Ruth studied her grandmother's face, looking for cracks, finding none. She said, "You've been carrying this a long time. Are you sure you're ready to put it down?" Layla thought about the question, about the years of watching, waiting, preparing, about the nights she'd spent mapping every debt, every obligation, every liability that Mitchell had accumulated while believing himself untouchable. She said, "I'm not putting anything down, Grandma. I'm just stepping aside. He's the one who'll have to carry it." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and took Layla's hand. Her skin was paper-thin now, spotted with age, but her grip was still strong.
She said, "Your grandfather, God rest him, he used to say that the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. You remember that?" Layla remembered. She'd been thinking about it a lot lately. Ruth squeezed her hand. Then she said, "He's going to call you after, when he realizes. He's going to beg and threaten and try everything he knows. You need to be ready for that." Layla said, "I know." Ruth said, "And you need to decide now, before you're in the moment, what you're going to say." Layla had already decided. She decided months ago, in the quiet of her small apartment, while everyone else was planning her defeat. She said, "I'm going to say nothing. I'm going to hang up, and then I'm going to make dinner for my son." Ruth smiled, the kind of smile that held pride and sadness and wisdom in equal measure. She said, "That's my girl." They sat together until late, talking about small things. The garden Ruth was planning, a book Layla had been reading, the way Garrett was growing up so fast. Neither of them mentioned Mitchell again. They didn't need to. When Layla left, Ruth stood on the porch and watched her drive away. The last thing she said was, "Call me tomorrow night. I want to hear everything." Layla promised she would. The drive back to Atlanta took 4 hours. Layla spent most of it in silence, watching the highway unroll in her headlights, thinking about the morning, about the conference room where her marriage would officially end, about the moment Mitchell would discover what he'd really won.
She wasn't nervous. She wasn't excited. She felt something closer to completion. Like a book she'd been writing for years was finally reaching its last chapter. She got home after midnight. Garrett was staying with a friend. She'd arranged it deliberately, wanting him away from whatever tomorrow might bring. The apartment was dark and quiet. Layla poured herself a glass of water and sat at the small desk in her bedroom. In front of her was a folder. Inside the folder was everything. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence she'd collected over 3 years. She didn't need to open it. She'd memorized every page. But she opened it anyway, one last time. Not to review, to remember. This is what patience looks like, she thought. This is what it costs. She closed the folder, put it in her bag, and went to sleep. Tomorrow, Mitchell Crane would get everything he ever wanted, and it would ruin him. The conference room was cold. That was the first thing Layla noticed when she walked in, the aggressive air conditioning, the way it made everything feel sterile, clinical, like a room designed for endings. Mitchell was already there, seated at the head of the table with his lawyer, Caroline Meacham, beside him. He wore his best suit, the charcoal one he saved for important closings. His watch caught the light every time he moved his hand. He didn't stand when Layla entered, didn't acknowledge her at all. He was too busy reviewing the papers in front of him, a small smile playing at his lips. Layla took her seat across from him. She'd come alone, no lawyer, just the court-appointed mediator, a tired man named Douglas, who'd seen 1,000 divorces and expected this one to be simple. It was simple, that was the point. The signing took less than 20 minutes, page after page of assets transferring to Mitchell, the house, the properties, the company shares, the investment accounts, everything. Layla signed without hesitation, without negotiation, without asking for a single thing beyond the modest settlement they'd agreed to, barely enough to cover a year of expenses. Mitchell watched her sign with barely concealed satisfaction. He'd expected a fight, expected tears or lawyers or last-minute demands. Instead, he got compliance. It made him confident. It made him careless. When the last page was signed, Mitchell reached for the documents like a man collecting his winnings. He was already planning the celebration. Dinner with Brienne, maybe champagne. Caught her eye. A number that didn't match. A liability she hadn't seen before. She whispered 3 words. "Check page 47. Mitchell's smile flickered. He flipped to the page. His eyes moved across the numbers. The color drained from his face the way water drains from a cracked glass, slowly at first, then all at once. Page 47 was the debt schedule, the comprehensive accounting of every liability attached to every asset Mitchell had just claimed. Mortgages, lines of credit, loans, liens, obligations that had been buried in the fine print, scattered across subsidiary companies and holding structures he'd never bothered to understand, because he'd never needed to understand them. Layla had always handled that part. Mitchell's hand began to shake. He said, "This isn't right. These numbers, this isn't what we discussed." Caroline's face had gone carefully blank.
the expression lawyers wear when they realize their client has lied to them. She said, "Mitchell, these are the liabilities attached to the assets you're acquiring. They were disclosed in the standard documentation. Did you review them?" Of course he hadn't reviewed them. He'd been too busy winning. The numbers were devastating. The Midtown property, his crown jewel, was mortgaged 3 times over. The office building in Sandy Springs had liens from 2 different lenders. The credit lines Mitchell had used to fund his lifestyle were all secured against properties that were now underwater. Total liabilities exceeded total assets by more than $2 million.
Mitchell had fought for the right to inherit a catastrophe. He turned to Layla. For the first time all morning, he actually looked at her. He said, "What is this? What did you do?" Layla didn't answer immediately. She was putting her pen in her bag, straightening her jacket, preparing to leave. Mitchell's voice rose. He said, "Layla, answer me. What the hell is this?" She looked at him then, really looked at him. The man she'd married 12 years ago, the man who'd promised her the moon, the man who'd erased her from their own company and replaced her with a woman half her age. She said, "I didn't do anything, Mitchell. I just let you have what you insisted on keeping." The words landed like stones in still water. Mitchell stared at her, trying to process, trying to understand how the victory he'd been savoring had turned to ash in his mouth. Caroline was already on her phone, calling someone at the firm, damage control, the kind of call that meant billable hours were about to multiply exponentially. The mediator, Douglas, was gathering his things with the speed of a man who wanted to be anywhere else, and Layla was walking toward the door. Mitchell scrambled to his feet, his chair scraped against the floor. He said, "You can't do this! You planned this! You set me up!" Layla paused at the door. She didn't turn around. She said, "I didn't set you up. I just paid attention while you didn't." Then she walked out. Her heels clicked on the marble floor of the hallway, steady, unhurried, the rhythm of someone who'd been waiting years for this walk and wanted to remember every step. Behind her, she could hear Mitchell's voice rising, demanding answers, threatening lawsuits, making the kind of noise that people make when they finally realize they've lost. She didn't look back. In the elevator, her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, not from guilt, from release. Years of patience, years of silence, years of watching and waiting and preparing, all of it leading to this moment. The doors opened to the lobby. Sunlight poured through the windows. Atlanta spread out beyond the glass, bright and indifferent.
Layla stepped outside and took a breath. The air was warm, real, alive. She pulled out her phone and called Ruth. Her grandmother answered on the second ring. Layla said, "It's done." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you feel?" Layla thought about it, about Mitchell back in that conference room, his empire collapsing around him, about Brienne waiting at home, about to discover that her golden ticket was actually a debt notice, about Darlene, who'd spent months decorating a house that would soon belong to the bank. She said, "I feel like myself again." Ruth laughed, a warm, knowing sound. She said, "Then it was worth it, every bit of it." Layla agreed. Then she hung up and walked to her car. She had to pick up Garrett. She'd promised to take him for ice cream after school. A small thing, a normal thing, the kind of thing that mattered more than any conference room victory. Behind her, in that cold room she'd just left, Mitchell Crane was discovering what she'd known for 3 years. The properties were worthless. The company was insolvent. The life he'd fought so hard to keep was nothing but debt wearing designer suit. His phone rang. Brienne. He stared at the screen, unable to answer, unable to explain, unable to do anything but sit there and understand, finally, that he'd never been as smart as he thought he was. He answered on the 4th ring. His voice was hollow. Brienne said, "Hey, how'd it go? Did you get everything?" Mitchell opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He said, "We need to talk." There was a pause. The kind of pause that happens when someone realizes the ground is shifting beneath them. Brienne said, "What do you mean? Mitchell, what happened?" He couldn't find the words. He couldn't explain that the house she was decorating would be seized, that the accounts she was spending from were empty, that the future she'd been promised was built on nothing. He said, "Just, I'll be home soon. We need to talk." He hung up before she could ask anything else.
Caroline was standing by the window, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in the low, urgent tones of someone managing a disaster. She glanced at Mitchell with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt, hard to tell with lawyers. Mitchell sat alone at the conference table, surrounded by documents that represented everything he'd wanted and nothing he could use. He'd spent 12 years building an empire on sand, and the tide had just come in. The aftermath in the conference room lasted another hour. Mitchell demanded to speak to his lawyer privately. Caroline agreed, her face a mask of professional composure that barely concealed her fury. They went into a side room. Through the glass walls, Layla could see Mitchell gesturing wildly, his voice rising and falling in waves of accusation and desperation. She didn't stay to watch. There was nothing left for her in that building. Outside, the Atlanta sun was almost too bright, the kind of brightness that felt like a fresh start. Layla walked to her car slowly, savoring each step. The click of her heels on the parking garage concrete, the weight of her bag, lighter now somehow, even though nothing physical had changed. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mitchell, then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. She didn't read them. She just drove. The ice cream shop was a small place near Garrett's school. Nothing fancy, just good vanilla and a woman named Eleanor who remembered every child's name. Garrett was waiting outside when she pulled up. His teacher had told him his mom was picking him up early. A special day, she'd said. He climbed into the car with the wariness of a child who'd learned that surprises weren't always good. He said, "Is everything okay?" Layla smiled, a real smile, the first one in months. She said, "Everything is fine, baby. Better than fine. I just thought we deserved some ice cream." They sat at a little table by the window, Garrett with chocolate and Layla with mint chip. He told her about his day, about a book his teacher was reading to the class, about a friend who'd gotten in trouble for talking too much. Normal things, small things, the things that made up a life. At one point, he looked at her with those serious eyes, her eyes, everyone said, and asked if the divorce was done. Layla said it was. He asked if Dad was going to be okay. Layla thought about Mitchell back in that conference room, his world collapsing around him, about the months of struggle ahead, about the consequences that were just beginning to unfold. She said, "Your dad has some things to work through, but he's a grown man. He'll figure it out." Garrett nodded. Then he said, "Are we going to be okay?" Layla reached across the table and wiped a smudge of chocolate from his chin. She said, "We're going to be better than okay. We're going to be great." He believed her. She could see it in the way his shoulders relaxed, in the way he smiled and went back to his ice cream. That night, after Garrett was in bed, Layla sat in the quiet of her apartment and finally let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She'd won, not in the way that people usually mean when they talk about winning a divorce. She hadn't gotten the house or the money or the validation of a court declaring her the victim. She'd won something bigger, something quieter. She'd gotten herself back. The phone rang, Ruth's ringtone, an old song they both loved. Layla answered. Ruth said, "I've been waiting all day. Tell me everything." So Layla told her, every detail, the conference room, Mitchell's face, the walk to the elevator, the ice cream with Garrett. When she finished, Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You know what your grandfather would say if he was here?" Layla said, "What?" Ruth said, "He'd say that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well while they have to watch." Layla thought about that, about Mitchell, wherever he was right now, trying to explain to Brienne why their future had just evaporated, about Darlene, who would find out soon enough that the empire she'd attached herself to was worthless, about all the people who'd dismissed her, underestimated her, written her off as the boring wife who couldn't keep up. She said, "I don't want revenge, Grandma. I just want peace." Ruth said, "Then you already have it. Everything else is just paperwork." They talked for another hour, about the future, about Garrett, about the garden Ruth was planning and the book Layla was thinking about writing. Small things and big things, all mixed together the way life always is. When they finally hung up, Layla held something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate kind of hope that clings to things staying the same. The quiet kind. The kind that comes when you realize you can survive anything, because you already have. She went to bed that night and slept better than she had in months. Meanwhile, across the city, Mitchell Crane was learning what it meant to lose everything. Brienne had met him at the door when he finally got home. She'd known something was wrong the moment she saw his face. He tried to explain, tried to make it sound manageable, tried to frame it as a setback rather than a catastrophe. She'd listened, asked questions, done the math, and then she'd gone very quiet. That night she slept in the guest room. The nursery she'd spent months decorating was just down the hall, soft and yellow and waiting for a future that was no longer certain. Mitchell lay awake in the master bedroom, the room he'd once shared with Layla, now redecorated beyond recognition, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in his life,
He had no idea what to do next. He thought about calling Layla, apologizing, begging, trying to negotiate some kind of arrangement that might save him. But even in his desperation, he knew it was too late. She'd been preparing for this for years. Every document in order, every disclosure complete, every trap perfectly set. He'd walked right into it. No, he'd demanded to walk into it, insisted on it, fought for the right to claim everything she'd laid out for him. She hadn't stolen anything. She'd just let him take what he thought he wanted. That was the worst part, the thing that would keep him awake for months. She'd beaten him without throwing a single punch.
Without raising her voice, without doing anything except paying attention while he didn't. The loudest person in the room is rarely the one in control. He didn't know where he'd heard that, but lying there in the dark, watching his whole life collapse around him, he finally understood what it meant. 3 months later, the house in Buckhead was gone. The bank had moved fast once Mitchell defaulted on the first loan. The other properties followed like dominoes. The Midtown development, the office building in Sandy Springs, the portfolio he'd bragged about at dinner parties. One by one, they were seized, sold, or surrendered. Crane Development Group filed for bankruptcy protection in August. The name that had once meant something in Atlanta real estate became a cautionary tale, a warning. Don't pull a Crane, people started saying when someone over-leveraged. Don't end up like Mitchell. Brienne left 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She'd stayed long enough to understand the situation, long enough to calculate her options, and not a day longer. The baby was born in September. Mitchell saw his daughter twice before Brienne relocated to Nashville to be closer to her family. The custody arrangement was minimal, his choice. He couldn't afford to fight for more. Darlene stopped calling after the bankruptcy filing. She'd staked her identity on Mitchell's success, and watching that success collapse was more than she could bear. She told friends that she'd always known Layla was trouble, that Mitchell should have listened to her from the start. The story changed depending on the audience, but the ending was always the same. None of it was her fault. Mitchell tried to reach Layla several times, texts, voicemails. Once, he showed up at her apartment building and buzzed until a neighbor threatened to call the police. His messages followed a pattern. First came anger, accusations, threats, promises of legal action that never materialized. Then came bargaining, offers to talk, to explain, to work something out. Finally came something that might have been remorse, though it was hard to tell the difference between genuine regret and the desperation of a man who'd run out of options.
Layla never responded, not once. She'd meant what she said to Ruth. She'd hang up and she'd make dinner for her son. That's exactly what she did. Garrett was doing better. The divorce had been hard on him, harder than Layla would ever fully know. But children are resilient when they feel safe, and Garrett felt safe now. His mother was present, his routine was stable. The chaos of his father's world was something that happened somewhere else to someone else. They had dinner together every night. They did homework at the kitchen table. On weekends, they went to movies or the park, or just drove around with the windows down, talking about nothing important. Once, Garrett asked about his dad, asked if Mitchell was okay. Layla chose her words carefully. She said, "Your dad made some choices that had consequences. He's dealing with those consequences now. It's not your job to fix that. It's not anyone's job but his." Garrett nodded. He didn't ask again. Layla went back to work. Nothing glamorous. Consulting for small businesses, helping them avoid the kinds of mistakes she'd watched Mitchell make. The pay was modest, the hours were flexible, the work was honest. The apartment in Decatur stayed the same, small, clean, hers. She thought about moving somewhere bigger, somewhere with a yard for Garrett, but there was time for that, no rush, no need to prove anything to anyone. One Sunday evening, Ruth called. They talked for an hour about nothing and everything. Near the end, Ruth asked how Layla was feeling, really feeling, not the answers she gave to friends and acquaintances. Layla thought about it, about the past year, about everything she'd survived and everything she'd become. She said, "I feel free. Not happy, exactly, that's too simple, but free, like I can finally breathe." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Freedom isn't about winning, baby. It's about not needing anyone else to lose for you to feel whole." Layla understood. She'd understood for a while now.
The last time she heard anything about Mitchell, it was through a mutual acquaintance. He'd taken a job with a property management company in Marietta, entry-level, commission-based, a far cry from the corner office and the magazine profiles. The acquaintance seemed to expect Layla to feel something, Satisfaction, maybe, or vindication, proof that karma was real. But Layla didn't feel any of that. She didn't feel anything at all about Mitchell anymore. He was a chapter that had ended, a lesson that had been learned, nothing more. That night, she sat on her small balcony with a cup of tea. The city lights spread out below her, millions of stories unfolding in the dark. Somewhere out there, Mitchell was waking up to another day of consequences. Somewhere out there, Brienne was raising a daughter he barely knew. Somewhere out there, Darlene was rewriting history to protect her pride. And here, in this small apartment, Layla was just living, just breathing, just being exactly who she'd always been, only now without anyone else's shadow. She thought about Ruth, about all those lessons at the kitchen table, about the patience and the planning and the years of quiet preparation. She thought about what it had cost her and what it had given her. She didn't win because she fought harder. She won because she understood something Mitchell never did. The loudest person in the room is rarely the one in control. Ruth would have been proud, not of the outcome, but of the patience it took to get there. Layla finished her tea and went inside. Tomorrow was a school day. Garrett had a project due. There was laundry to fold and lunches to pack and a life to live. Small things, normal things, the things that actually mattered. She turned off the lights and let the quiet settle around her. The next morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. For a moment, she lay still, feeling the warmth on her face, listening to the sounds of the city waking up. Then she heard Garrett in the kitchen, the clinking of a cereal bowl, the refrigerator opening and closing, the small sounds of a child learning to take care of himself.
She got up, made coffee, helped him find his missing shoe, packed his lunch, turkey sandwich, apple, the cookies he liked but pretended not to. At the door, he paused, looked back at her. He said, "Mom?" She said, "Yeah, baby?" He said, "Thanks for being my mom." Then he was gone, backpack bouncing as he ran for the school bus. Layla stood in the doorway and watched until he disappeared around the corner. The morning was crisp. The neighborhood was waking up. Somewhere a dog barked. Somewhere a car engine started. Normal things, small things, the things that made a life worth living. She closed the door and went back inside. There was work to do, clients to help, a future to build. Not a revenge fantasy or a success story, just a life. Her life, the one she'd chosen. She poured another cup of coffee and sat at her small desk by the window. Outside, the world was moving on. Inside, she was finally still. For the first time in 12 years, it felt like peace. She picked up her phone and texted Ruth, "Good morning, everything's okay." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, "I know it is. I raised you." Layla smiled, set down the phone, and got to work. The story wasn't over. Stories never really end, they just become different stories. But this chapter was closed. The pages were written. And whatever came next, she would face it the same way she'd faced everything else, with patience, with clarity, with the quiet strength of a woman who'd learned that the loudest person in the room is rarely the one in control. Ruth would have been proud, not of the outcome, but of the patience it took to get there. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.